Guys, and welcome back. So now we're gonna start creating our first RBD simulation. And so what I'm going to start with is a simple cube that I'm going to copy a few times, and I'm going to offset the copies so we have them placed like this. Cool. So now I have that, and I'm going to put down a transform node and move this up. And I'm going to create a sphere, and let's move this back as well. And I'm going to view the sphere and move it up and scale it a little bit. Cool. And I'm going to call this out RBD, and this is out sphere. And so the way we pass in things to the rigid body solver is using a primitive format called packed primitives. And what this packed primitive does is it takes the geometry and basically converts it into one point. And this is a very efficient way of handling a large amount of individual pieces, and it's perfect for destruction, and it's very memory efficient, and that's what we're going to be using with the RBD solver. So the way we convert this mesh, this geometry, to a packed primitive is using a node called assemble. So I'm going to hit tab and type in assemble, and I'm going to put that in there. And the first one we need is an attribute called name that's going to be used in DOPS to identify each piece. Each group of primitives. Okay, and I'm gonna leave that on, and I'm gonna check this create packed geometry. Okay, and if I middle click now, you can see it says 10 packed fragments, and we only have a P attribute, position, and name. And the display as this is just an OpenGL preview. It's not what's in memory. And to view the actual data is using the centroid. So if you click the centroid here, you can see that for each point there is a point at the centroid, and that's what's going to be passed to DOPS along with the geometry, but it's in a compressed format that is very efficient for DOPS. So I'm going to create a DOP network now, and I'm gonna dive inside. Okay, and with DOPS there is multiple dynamic rigid body solvers, and the one we're gonna be using is called Bullet, and what's being used basically in all the feature films and stuff. So I'm gonna hit tab and create Bullet solver, and that will create this node here, and it has few options. The most important ones are the number of sub-steps and the constraint iteration. And so this one will increase the number of sub-steps the solver does to solve collisions and forces, and this one is to solve the constraint network and when to break things and when not to. And so this is the Bullet solver, and the way we create an active RBD object is a packed primitive RBD object is using a node called packed primitive, RBD packed object, sorry. So I'm gonna hit tab, type in RBD packed object, and I'm gonna connect that. Okay, and I'm going to create a gravity node. I'm going to create a ground. I'm going to create a merge node and merge the ground, then the solver, and then connect all of it. And the reason I merged the ground first is because if you look at the merge node, there is this effector relationship, and it says left inputs affect right input. So this guy will affect this guy, and this is the order. We need, and the relationship is collide relationship. And so now the only thing left to do is specify the SOP path, which is we call that RBD out RBD. Cool. So now we have our guys. and if I hit play, they just fall down. Okay, they bounce, and then basically they do that small movement. And so the other thing I want to add is the static sphere, and we're gonna create that using a static object. And I'm gonna merge these two together. I'd like to merge all my static object into one merge before connecting that to the solver chain. Okay, and here I'm going to specify the out sphere. So we have the sphere now, and if I hit play, it falls and it interacts. I'm gonna change the playback to real time. I'm gonna hit save. So now it's real-time playback. Cool. So this is a very basic RBD sim, and we saw we only needed these two, this object, and basically these three nodes. These nodes, if you don't put gravity, nothing will fall down. So that's the force, and these are the only two nodes needed to make this work. So the other thing we're going to look at is the constraint network. And the way the constraint network is, as we talked about in the first video, it's going to create a connection, a line between the neighboring pieces. Okay? And so to create the constraint network, to create these lines, we use a node called connect adjacent pieces. Okay? And I'm going to connect it here. Okay, well, it's giving me this warning, but let's see what is it saying. It's saying attribute name either not used or unrecognized. Well, let's see, name, it is here. So why is it complaining? Well, the reason why is because this guy is a packed primitive, okay? And Houdini doesn't have access to that entire geometry without unpacking it. Okay, there is another process called unpacking to make that geometry accessible again for Houdini. And so this node is looking for that geometry data, but it's not finding it. And so let's try and connect it here to where we didn't do the packed and see. Okay, invalid attribute specification, attribute name either not or. Okay, it's still complaining. And the reason for that is because in this node we're doing the naming and the packing. And for this to work, it is requesting the geometry to be named but not packed. So what we need to do is we need to uncheck create name here, or let me delete this entirely. I'm gonna create an assemble SOP. Okay, sorry, and I'm only going to check create name attribute. Okay, and see now this node is not complaining. And I'm gonna put down an assemble here, and I'm gonna click create pack geometry and uncheck create name. So now I'm naming things here and I'm packing them here, and this gives us the data that we need for this node and for the DOPS as well. So now it's creating this link between these points, and there is a few methods. There's three methods here, and right now it's trying to connect the nearest points, and that's not what we want. We want the adjacent pieces from surface points, and this will give us a link. If I template this, it's going to create a link between the centroid of these guys, and there is this max offset from centroid. You can see where they are coming from. Okay, that's the connection created. So now this is our constraint network, but if I middle click here, there is nothing special about it. It's just lines between 2 points. So how would Houdini know what to do with this? Well, it's not. It still need a few other things. And the other thing it needs is the constraint name. We need to define this at the SOP level. And I'm gonna put down an attribute wrangle. And this is a primitive attribute, and it's called constraint name. And I'm gonna call this anything. I'm gonna call this my constraint. Okay. And now I'm going to copy this, and call this out constraint. And I'm gonna dive inside, and I'm gonna show you how the constraint works. But before I do that, I'm going to explain the various constraint types. And so there is four types in Houdini, four main types of constraint in Houdini, and the one we're going to be using are two of them only. And so the first one is called a glue constraint. Sorry about the text. Or actually, it's called glue constraint. And the second one is called it is called a hard pin constraint, and I'm gonna call this pin constraint. Okay. The third one is called spring constraint, and the fourth one is called a slider constraint. And I believe there is a hinge constraint as well. Hinge constraint. And so the main ones are these guys, and these are for specific use cases. But the ones we're going to be using in this course are the glue and the pin. And basically, this glue, the kind of motion it creates is a strong bond between the two pieces. And when it breaks, it frees the two pieces. Each one will go in its own way. The pin constraint is a soft link between the two pieces. They can still bend and flex based on that constraint position. So if you have two pieces, like this, and you put the constraint here, and this is one of the properties of the pin. The pin constraint needs to be a single point. And so these guys, if I look at them from the top, they can do this kind of motion. They can bend, and then they can even bend more, and stuff like that. So there is a free rotation and zero translation basically in the pin. The spring constraint will do something similar to this, but it will allow them to move apart and then try to bring them back together if it can. The slider constraint will simply slide each geometry along a certain axis, and it can rotate. It allows them to rotate. So if I have a piece here and another piece here, they will have an angle that they can rotate on. Okay, and they can slide as well. So we'll take a look at that example. So I'm gonna briefly set this up, and in the next video we're gonna look at more examples of each one of these guys. Cool. So we gave it a name, and then I'm gonna go back to the DOP. And the way we create constraints is using a constraint network node. So I'm going to type in constraint, and you can see there is this node here called constraint network. And this node by default doesn't do much. It only imports whatever constraint we have defined here. If you have defined 15 and grouped them together using a merge node and put everything through this node, you can import all that data to the DOPs using this node. So I'm going to click here and say out constraint. Okay, and this only makes the data available, but we don't have anything attached. We don't have any constraint. If I click here, it says constraint to create. And the way this works is we're going to create our constraint now. And the first one we're going to create is a glue constraint relationship, and I'm going to connect that. And I'm going to hit play. Okay, well, nothing happened. And the reason for that is because this glue and this guy, they don't know where to get attached to or where to get the data from. And the way we tell Houdini that is using that name, constraint name that we defined, and we called it my constraint, and that's what we put in here. And now you see we have this line. If we remove this, we don't have that line, and if I put this value, we have that line in there. And so Houdini imported the data here and then attached this glue type constraint to those points or those primitives by using the name. And so if I hit play now, you can see they stick together for a bit and then they broke. You can see the red wire is gone, and the reason for that is because it's getting deleted, or it's getting broken by the force, and that is decided using this strength. So if the strength of the impact is bigger than this value, it's gonna break basically. So I'm gonna set this to a higher value, and I'm gonna hit play. You see now they're all together, none of them broke. And let's reduce it down. Nope, even more. Let's try 5. Yep. So basically the amount of force was able to break these guys that hit and none of these guys. Okay, so this is one type of constraint, and we're gonna look more into the constraints in the next video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.